Welcome to another episode of the Hoopsfix Podcast with me, your host Sam Nita, full-time British basketball advocate. And on this week's show, we have none other than Tim Lewis. He is one of the most respected British coaches currently plying his trade abroad. Tony G calls him a bit of a British trailblazer because of what he's done overseas in the time that he has left. A former player himself, he's represented the junior and senior national teams, obviously played pro as well, earned himself a Division 1 scholarship to University of New Hampshire in the States, and then eventually, ended up making the switch to coaching, and kind of in 2006 made a big switch of really kind of pursuing his dream hard, giving up teaching, and trying to make the basketball dream happen. Since then, he's done stints all over the place, whether it be Thailand, with the Qatar National Team, Germany, the Philippines, America. Done multiple stints with the G League and with NBA teams. So, fascinating to kind of get his perspective. We did something a little bit different. Obviously, normally I follow a kind of historical timeline of someone's career, but I would recommend you go and check out his podcast on Basketball England's Time Out podcast with Tony G, which kind of goes into more his journey. On this, we did do that a little bit, but actually focused on various different topics around things that he's done, just to kind of give it a little bit of a different angle. But it was a thoroughly enjoyable conversation. He gave a real unique perspective, and I think you can hear there's a lot of value to give, and it does beg the question when he actually talks about it, is like, why is his knowledge not extracted and sort of distributed or connected with British coaches more in this country? Why is there not a way for him to be able to kind of provide that knowledge and information back to the next generation to help the sport grow, because he's clearly got a wealth of experience and is someone that should be more involved with the game here. So a bunch of stuff to talk about, whether it's 2012 Olympics or just the state of coaching in general and what needs to be done to help kind of grow and elevate the status of things over here. It was a great conversation, which I think you will enjoy as much as I did. As always, before we get into the show, please take 2 seconds to check out our Patreon account, patreon.com/hoopsfix. That's patreon.com/HOOPSFIX. There you can sign up to give us a monthly or annual contribution of as much or as little as you would like. The price of a cup of coffee, the price of a sandwich. You won't even notice that money leaving your account every month, but it goes a long way in helping us do the things that we're trying to do to help grow the British basketball media landscape. So please go and check it out, patreon.com/hoopsfix. As always, if you're watching on YouTube, leave a comment below. Let me know what you think about what Tim had to say. If you want some private one-on-one interaction, you can drop me an email, sam@hoopsfix.com, or you can reach me on every single social media platform @hoopsfix. Anyway, that is enough from me. Here is this week's show with Tim Lewis. Tim, welcome to the show.
Good morning. Thanks for having me on.
Pleasure to have you. There's obviously so much stuff to go into. Your career has been very well travelled, seen a lot of places, done a lot of things, and it's hard to kind of even think about where to begin. But I guess because I said to you before we start recording, I listened to obviously your interview with Mark Woods with MVP, and your interview with Tony G, which I encourage people to go and check out as well, which will obviously provide a bit more context. But the thing that struck out to me was a quote that you said, which was opportunity over money. And it seems like that has been a big, guiding force factor in sort of your journey, your path in coaching. And I'd just like to hear you riff on that a little bit and kind of your thoughts about that and why that is something that I guess has been a sort of guiding light in your career.
Yeah, I think, as a British coach with lots of obstacles to overcome, you're not going to ultimately walk straight into jobs that are going to pay you a lot of money. And we're talking 6 figures plus. And to turn down opportunities early on, it just didn't make any sense. And that's the way that it's continued. And somebody early on said to me, look, don't take and pick jobs over money situations. Take the jobs for the opportunity, because if you do well and you progress and you prove yourself, then good things will happen. And that's what I've stuck with, and that's what I've believed. I've sort of gone from level to level and enjoyed coaching at those levels, and then found another opportunity. The only disadvantage to that is it's shown that there's been short periods of time in certain places. Some of those were choice. Some of those were driven by changes in organization or needs of organizations that you're already in. So,
how difficult do you find it, or have you found it in the past, to potentially give up that financial security and stability that so many of us need, but knowing or believing that sort of down the line it's going to pay off, and there's going to be a payoff for that sacrifice?
Sure. I think the first thing is you got to back yourself. You got to believe in what your abilities are, and if I didn't take that approach, then those doors wouldn't open. I was a school teacher, like a lot of basketball coaches were. I played and taught, and then I coached and taught at different levels. And teaching always gave you a security. I could go and coach basketball because I knew I had a job during the week that would allow me to do it. I got divorced in 2006, and life kind of changed. Opportunities present itself. I knew that I'd always wanted to be involved in basketball full time. I was always passionate about that. And I sat back and reviewed. Education had changed considerably, and the choice for me was very easy. And I just backed myself, and it's like launching your kids. I was 36 or 37 when I did it. So, I relaunched myself, and I don't really have no regrets at all. It's been a great journey. I've had some great experiences, and then coached in some great clubs and great countries.
Do you think you would have ever ended up making that jump if it wasn't for the divorce? Like when I look at my situation, for example, I know there's a lot of things I do right now and have done for the last decade or so that if I was in a situation where I had a partner and I had kids, I don't think they would have been an option. Do you think that the divorce was what allowed you to suddenly make that leap, or do you think that actually it would have come to a point where you felt like, what, this is always what I've wanted to do, I'm going to make this jump? It just would have maybe come a bit later.
I had a couple of opportunities when I was married that I had to decline because of that situation of being married. And I think coaching is a volatile environment, no matter what level you're at. There's always, I think I said it in my last podcast or interview, you're always going to be hired to be fired. And there's ultimately change. I mean, we see it in all professional sports. And to do that with a young family is definitely very difficult. With a spouse that could work anywhere or has an understanding of what you're doing and you're earning enough money, then you could do it. But I think early on, especially coming out of England, where you're not going to jump into jobs that are going to pay enough money to support your family. I went to Gran Canaria initially and was, I don't know, $500 maybe a month, living for free, but starting on a journey that I wanted to sort of live. So I think it's extremely difficult, and I think it's one of the biggest factors is for British coaches is they're very stable in their jobs. Most people have a job and they coach. There are young guys that have reached out and spoken about my journey and how it's happened that would like to take that step, but that's a huge anchor around them. I go work in France and I pay $500. I can't cover this. I can't pay for that. And so that's a stopping block. And I think it is a huge noose around people's necks that they prevents them from moving forward.
When you talk about, I guess, the barriers that British coaches face, the ones that I guess you were facing when you were in the UK before you made the leap to go overseas, and then I guess the same when you went overseas as a British coach, the perception of you as a British coach, kind of what would you say about the kind of the barriers and the perception and I guess that whole dynamic of being a coach within basketball?
Yeah, I think initially the biggest barriers that I found was being able to coach full time in England. It just wasn't possible. I mean, first off, the doors weren't open. There were people that were set where they wanted, in the jobs that they'd been in, and that was part of the big reason that we started Essex Pirates, was ultimately to give British kids a window of opportunity and a highlight that has missed out, and then to allow us to coach. And so that was the biggest factor. And then when you go overseas, the first thing is, you're not American, you're not Serbian, you're not Spanish, you're not, you go down a list of countries, and people will ultimately, you coach soccer, don't you? Or you don't coach basketball. And so there's that stigma still, I think. It may have eased slightly now with the progression of British basketball in terms of obviously competing at the Olympics, and then, success recently. But I look at Mark. I mean, Mark, I coached when he was a youngster, and now he's got an opportunity to really start to move out. But the same things around him, family, kids, was in a job. I know there's some changes going on, but it's hard. It's hard to compete against people, especially when you have Greeks that'll do it for $1,000 a month, and Serbians that'll do it for $500 a month. And teams, especially in today's current climate, are very conscious of cost. So to give up a job that's paying you, I don't know, school teacher salary for a year, and then you go and do it for 500, 1,000, big stepping block for people.
Did you think, within the BBL, we see, I think, the BBL, it feels like the BBL isn't as cutthroat maybe as other leagues in Europe in terms of coaches losing their jobs, after poor performances. It's, there is a lot of much more longer tenured coaches in the domestic league, and so there's then you're talking about 11 full-time jobs. I'm trying to think whether there are assistant coaches within the BBL that are also full-time. I don't think there is. But do you think the league needs to look at trying to provide more opportunities for assistant coaches that are salaried within sort of that professional club structure to help that coach development and provide opportunities for coaches? Like, what needs to be done to be able to provide more paid opportunities for coaches in the UK?
I'm all for long tenured when you're winning. I mean, Rob Paternostra has done an unbelievable job at Leicester. Why would you change that? But I think where you have situations that either players don't develop or the program doesn't move forward, then there should be an evolution of coaches. I think we struggle in England because we don't provide the opportunities you're talking about. There are no full-time assistants. There are no opportunities for those people to focus on basketball, so they're not investing in their trade. You go and coach anywhere else in the world, and you've got full-time assistants. I'm not saying they're making a lot of money, but they're full-time. They're focused on what they have to do day in, day out, and we don't provide that. It's been that way forever, and it's worked, and it's a model that people have accepted, and I think that's why we see improvements, but we don't see major gains. And there are a number of coaches in the BBL that have been extremely successful, that have continued to be successful. And it's like any league, they'll rehash some of the same coaches. But there are also coaches that probably need to move on and allow younger coaches to come through. And that's the problem, is that as a young coach in England, what's my pathway? Like, we talk away pathway for the last, I don't know how many years since I was involved with GB basketball. But in terms of the BBL pathway, a young aspiring coach, what's my end game? Am I going to go and coach at London Lions? Probably not. Am I going to go and coach at Plymouth? Whatever, whatever club you choose, there's probably not a lot of opportunity. And there are some talented coaches in England that need that opportunity to go. It's a struggle for them to go overseas because of the things we just talked about. And then it's a struggle for them to advance in their own country. And you find that they tend to stagnate in Division 1 or Division 2 and never have an opportunity to move forward. I think probably you would want more teams in the BBL. We threw around ideas many years ago about, create a team that young British kids play in, a crew of British staff. Maybe it's linked to national teams. something that's going to help us overall. But I think there's a lot of options you could look at, but ultimately at the moment, why is Mark not coaching in the top level leagues? Now, he has jobs and there may be other reasons, and it was easier to coach at the level he was coaching at. But I think it's the thing that holds us back in terms of developing our coaches. And I don't necessarily think we do enough to develop coaches. I think there's coaches that have experience that don't get utilized to help feed back our experiences, pathway, how do we do that, and stuff like that.
So if a younger coach came to you and said, my dream one day is to be a full-time professional coach, wherever that might be, and the pathway isn't clear to me about what I should do and how I should make that happen, what advice would you personally give?
It's funny because there's been a couple of coaches, most recently Troy Cully from
ISCO.
Troy Cully from ISCO we've had an ongoing sort of development over a Zoom, which has been great. It's been great to give back and feedback. And I've always felt deeply about, trying to help British basketball, English basketball anyway. But that just seems to never have been on a radar in terms of using those experiences. So to me, the first thing is you have to back yourself and you have to be prepared to give up whatever you're doing now to take that path. And then that means sacrifice, money, leaving and living in a different country. You might be living in all sorts of conditions, but you ultimately get the opportunity overseas and you build a resume. And I think that's really important. People in Europe or anywhere in the world won't necessarily hire British coaches looking at you with just British experience on there. I've coached at Division 1, Division 2. I ran an academy. To them, that means nothing. When they start to see that there's, he was in Spain for 6 months. Oh, he went to Germany for a year. It shows that you've taken that step, I think. And that's the biggest thing for those young coaches. You got to understand that you could go, you may not succeed, you may get fired, but you continue to grow your network and follow the dream that you're doing. So the biggest thing is sacrificing where you're at, what you're doing, and be prepared to put both feet in, not just dip your toes in. You got to put both feet in and then be prepared to move forward. And I sometimes think there are a lot of people, not just in the UK, but there's a lot of people like the idea of being a professional coach, but don't necessarily want to embrace everything that goes with that. Because it's not an easy life. It's, you're packing your bags, you're living out of suitcases, you're moving, you may move every year, you may be 2 years, you may be without a job for 6 months so it's different. And 99% of us are wired very differently. Stable job, social life, whatever. So it's tough, but just back yourself, take that first step, And I think guys that are involved with national teams are at an advantage simply because they're exposed to European international teams, clubs, coaches, and so maximize those opportunities. I've always been an advocate of being involved with the national teams. I think it's a great experience. It's a great opportunity to grow your level of coaching and your network. But there should be a pathway, start at the development end and 16, 19, 18, 17, whatever it is the age groups are that now function.
On the flip side of that, that's your advice for individual coaches. If you're in charge on the federation side in the UK of developing more coaches and developing more world-class coaches, elite coaches, what would you do differently, compared to what they're doing now? What are the things that you would like to see in terms of either outlining the pathway, defining a pathway, or making sort of career progression clearer to help the development of coaches?
I think And I don't know fully where we're at now. I mean, I haven't been back and really involved with British basketball since 2012. I think there's a disconnect. We have that disconnect with BBL, or there used to be with BBL, and the pathway with British English basketball. In a lot of countries, all those leagues have a progression. They have feeder teams that are linked to it, and those coaches will move through it. The coaching qualifications are, I think, more difficult in different countries. They expect more of you because it's a profession. When you go to Italy, it's a profession. When you go to Spain, it's a profession. In our country, it's almost like you're arming a volunteer army to go out and coach in the environments that we're asking them to coach in. And I think that's probably the biggest issue, is that we expect all our basketball clubs to run primarily on a volunteer basis. And you can't do that. And so therefore, the governing body's got to find a way that it becomes a proper job. It becomes a proper opportunity. So instead of being a teacher, I'm going to become a full-time coach, like you would in soccer. How do we mirror it? How do they do it in France? How do they? So funding's a major issue, and I know that's still ongoing. And where are our priorities? And then a connect to the professional league in England. There are very few coaches that I can think of that move from English basketball level 1, 2, and 3 leagues to the BBL. And it goes back to what you talked about. There's a lot of long tenured coaches that don't really then provide opportunities for so what's our pathway? Division 1 is probably not a high enough level for the top coaches to be coaching in.
Yeah, it's tough questions that I think if anyone knew the answer to, the game would be in a very different situation than it is right now.
Yeah,
right?
I think the academies have probably helped, Sam. That you've got some good coaches, but again, you've got coaches now at the top end of those academy levels, which really need to be pushed to go to the next step. Where is that next step? Do I go overseas? I mean, these are the conversations, Troy's been having. It's very hard. Like, does he, he's qualifying as a teacher. How does he go there? How does he get there? There doesn't seem to be a lot of guidance. And I'm not in the country, and there may be, but there doesn't seem from the periphery a lot of guidance to allow those guys to grow. So we reach the top end of those academies. What's my next step? I go coach at Division 2. I want to go and coach at Division BBL, but how do I do that? There's no money. They don't pay me. So I've got to go and find a job. So it's just this vicious circle.
Yeah.
And I think that's why some of our better coaches now are coaching at the academy level. They're comfortable. They've got a full-time job. And to take that next step in the UK is actually really hard to decipher. And it shouldn't be. London, we should have teams in London that have got money that should be able to promote coaching. But I don't know whether there has ever really been an emphasis on the development of coaches. I think we do dabble with it, we play with it, but not to the extent that it needs to be.
Do you think that when you're talking about the development of the game in terms of really improving the standard of players, and then obviously the standard of national teams and national team success in the future and everything else, do you think that is fundamentally down to the level of coaches that we have and the number of coaches that we have to be able to provide opportunity for players?
Absolutely. I think if we don't have the quality of coaches that can continue, like at each level, I'm trying to think. If you go to Serbia, imagine a big circle and or a little circle with lots of circles outside of it. They know that first circle, they've done their job, they move it on to the next coaches, and then the next coaches and the next coaches, and ultimately they go to Red Star or Partizan or wherever they go. We've never had that. We've always had pockets where people will keep kids and they don't necessarily have the best coaches working with them. And so our pathway for players has never been directed through Sam Nieder's going to go to London club, then he's going to go to London B club, and then he's going to go to London A club, and then he's playing with the BBL club. It's always been, as far as I can see, pockets holding kids, never really moving kids to the best areas. So I think having or developing coaches at national teams and having the best coaches around definitely helps to grow the game and grow the players. But if we're not developing them in the right way or giving them the opportunities to grow, did I beat around the bush there? I'm not sure.
No. That makes sense. I completely get what you're saying. Jumping back to academies, like, my understanding of Essex Pirates when you set it up was to ultimately, you've got the academy, and then the pro club is providing sort of real opportunities for young British players, and it's one thing to say that you've got British players and young British players on your roster, but it's a completely different thing to actually provide real opportunities where they're going to play and get a chance to develop. Okay. And of course, for the it was two seasons that ultimately the program existed. You did that. Now, why do you think it is that we haven't seen another pro club definitely in the years that I've been around, and I don't think before that's really been able to do that? Like, now we're in a situation where I think when we're talking about academies in the BBL, the Leicester Riders have got the most successful sort of junior setup for when we're talking about the pro teams. But actually, even then, when you look at the minutes across their professional team, the players that are in their academy really aren't getting to play a whole lot or getting sort of meaningful opportunities at the pro level. Like, what's so difficult about being able to provide sort of meaningful opportunities for young British players? Why have we not seen more BBL clubs try to do essentially what the Essex Pirates are trying to do?
I think a big part of that is fear of failure. And when we go back to, you talk about long tenured coaches, and we're not necessarily assessing on wins and losses, my thought basis is that why aren't we doing more of this? Why aren't we giving players an opportunity at the top levels? And it's sort of contradictory. I think coaches, they would rather have 3 or 4 veterans, 4 or 5 Americans, whatever it is that we are allowed now, and play that way. And it's always been a part of the BBL that's never really been bought into, I think, is that the player development. And in terms of player development, they may have a feeder team or an academy, but then the opportunity to play at that highest level, it's like soccer. We talk about how ruthless soccer is in terms of taking young players, putting them through an academy, boom, they're in the top teams. They're not good enough, they don't make it. Part of our academies is we want more kids because it generates more money. It's not always about the development of the best players. So I think when we were at Essex, the mindset was, when you look at the players, Miles and Jamel and a few of those other guys, they were never going to play. Until they became on the scene at within the Pirates organization and GB or whatever it was, those kids would have gone under the radar potentially. And I think that whether we won or lost wasn't what we were about. And people never really understood that. We wanted to be in the BBL to present opportunities for British kids that clearly had talent to play. And I think, there's a lot about what went on with the club when we tried to move to London, and it was kind of blocked. I think had we been able to get to 3 and 4 years and financially it become more stable, which is always an issue in that environment, I think we would have started to achieve, because there were some kids coming through the academy that ended up going to college in the States, playing Division 1. but there was never a fear of losing. It was about coaching the kids the right way, giving them an opportunity to compete, and highlighting their strengths to teams. And ultimately, they're going to move on. It wasn't that they were going to stay with Essex for the next 10 years. It would open up an opportunity for them to go and play at the highest level they could achieve. And if that was the BBL, great. If that another team in the BBL, if it was in Europe, like Miles has gone to France. Jamel went to Australia for a while, and those kids have had a great opportunity to go and play. And it wasn't just us, the Pirates, that did that. There were people before us that had helped those kids get to where they are. But it doesn't make sense in terms of we're not going to fire coaches on the basis of wins and losses the majority of the time. Then let's invest in British players. Let's build the base of our British players. When you go back and look at, I don't know, when I played in the 80s and Crystal Palace, and you had all those teams that it was full of British kids, full and high level. And we have those kids. Look at the kids that are playing in the States. Why can't we retain those kids? Because I think we don't offer the right quality or advancement for them through what we do here at the moment.
Do you think it would be possible that in the UK we could get to a place where there could be a compelling enough offer to keep, to basically make a kid that has an option to go to a Division 1 school in the States actually make a choice and say, nah, do you know what? I want to stay here in the UK and earn a bit of money, maybe potentially get a degree if there's a link with the university, and be a professional basketball player and just sort of mainly focus on the basketball side of things. Do you think that the UK? Do you think that's a realistic proposition to get to a position where it is an option, like it's a choice that kids will want to make, rather than being so laser focused on the US college route?
I think the US option has always been so attractive because of what they see. But in reality, for some of those kids, we hear about the successes. There's a lot of kids that go to the States that don't have success. They go to the wrong program, they bounce around, they end up in different things. I think it's achievable in the UK, but I think we have to have teams playing in Europe, which means we've got to have more money coming into programs. And I think teams like Leicester have an educational route that rivals any university in the States in terms of Loughborough. I mean, unbelievable university in terms of sport and the opportunities that it presents. But we need teams to be playing then at a higher level. What's your long-term perspective? Like if you look at teams in Europe, they're signing these kids for 5-6 years, but they're paying the kids. They're not doing it for peanuts. They're not, so it's a different route. Not all kids are suited to university. So we're now sending more kids to Europe because we can't cater to them in the UK. I think it's achievable, but I think there's a number of things that probably need to be addressed. Finances, level of play, and then playing time, making sure that they're playing. A kid's not going to want to make a decision to stay in the UK to spend 4 years just playing 2 or 3 minutes a game. There's no opportunity for them to develop in the way that they need to at the highest level.
When you do a sort of post-mortem on the Essex project, what would be your analysis be of the mistakes that were made that potentially didn't give it the longevity that you originally wanted it to have? Kind of what ultimately led to its demise? Why didn't it last longer?
I mean, ultimately it was money. We had a business plan, a big project plan to move it to Crystal Palace into London. And we had backers on board financially, and it was rejected. And as soon as that happened, obviously money. When you say it was
rejected by who?
The BBL board. So we had everything in place. We had some major sponsors, major backing that would do it in relationship with Greenwich Leather, but there was resistance from a number of people around London. And this has been another, I think, sticking point for British basketball. Instead of being a collaborative group of people that want to see the game grow, we've got these pockets that want to control certain areas. So for us, we were prepared to move into that third season, moving it to Crystal Palace. We had a business plan in place, and they just said no. And as soon as that happened, Audi had been prepared to step up and put considerably more money in. We had considerably more money coming in from a couple of new sponsors, some innovative stuff Graham Wilson was working on, and it just hit a brick wall. And the vision, like for us to move forward, I'd utilize my own finances in the first 2 years, along with Audi, to get something that we really believed could be progressive, and we just hit a brick wall. And
Wow.
the winning and the losing, as I said to you before, wasn't the driver. It was to continue to give. And if we did it in the right way, we knew that longer term, the winning would ultimately come to place. So that was really what happened. It was just a brick wall. The board that met just dismissed it.
So basically, for the third season, originally the plan was to be in Crystal Palace. But then the moment that was blocked, you would then face with the prospect of actually you'd have to stay in Essex. That was an option for the financial backers of the project, and so ultimately they pulled the plug, and that was it.
Yeah. So we'd reviewed that. We felt that there were a lot of limitations in being based where we were. We'd managed it the first year or so, but we had university links with University of East London that were basically online, playing out of Palace, very similar to some of the things that have happened long term. So, what can you do? Your pockets are only so deep, and we basically came back from that, reviewed whether or not it was worthwhile continuing in the area that we were, and those people, some of those major backers didn't want to be involved. It was in Essex, and so it was really a financial decision to cease.
I mean, how much of a personal blow was that for you? Like, obviously, you've put at that point, because you did a year before with the academy before you did the pro club, right? So you'd put in 3 years of your life into building the program. You thought that it was kind of set in terms of the vision for the future, and then the plug is pulled. Like, I mean, that must be an incredibly difficult thing to deal with.
Yeah, it was disappointing, especially because I felt at the time we were very different to what everybody else was, what all the other clubs were. We would have integrated, I think, over the next couple of years, probably 1 or 2 imports that would complement the younger players, the right kind of people, high character leaders within an environment. But the goal was, we're going to play with British talent, and we're going to give these kids opportunities, and they're going to learn, and they're going to get better from it. It's going to help the national teams, and it's going to help them long term. And having played at Palace as a youngster, seen all that, Palace was a dream to go back to. It was, go back and recreate what had happened before. So it was disappointing. And I think what was more disappointing was just the lack of vision. I think the BBL at the time were very much weighed down by, you only won 7 games, you only won 6, whatever games we won. But I look at the league now, and we've got teams that are consistently winning 6 or 7 games with a full complement of imports. So it frustrated me more that people couldn't understand at the time what the vision was. And I think it's funny because over the last 4 or 5 years, people have started to actually, you know what, we actually realize what you were trying to do now at the Pirates. So, but the door closed, and you just have to move on and regroup and finance. And that was really my last, other than obviously the end of the Olympics, that was my last involvement with British basketball.
Yeah.
I've been overseas ever since.
At that time, when you were trying to articulate your vision and talking about the fact that you want to provide opportunities for British players and have British talent playing, what other BBL clubs did you feel like there was a, I guess, sort of rubbishing of your view of just saying this? Did anyone outright say to you, "This will never work"? You're completely going in the wrong direction here. This is just not the way this is ever going to work as a successful franchise.
Yeah, I think there were a couple of people that voiced their opinions in that way, and I think there's definitely an undercurrent of, well, we don't want teams that are in the league that are winning 7 games, and this is not what we need competitive teams. Well, let's look at what the bigger picture is here in long term and how it's going to go. So there was definitely an undercurrent of, this is not what we want to. And Sam, we were in a position where we could have continued to play that role for years, and if kids then from there, Jamel goes to Leicester, great. Go and, like anywhere in the world, like go and take that better opportunity and play in a better environment. This is your launching pad to go and play at a higher level or with a better club or to earn more money. But I just don't think people ever really understood where we were going, no matter how many times we sort of voiced our thoughts and opinions.
You mentioned the Olympics there. That was something that definitely, obviously, I wanted to speak about. You're unique in that actually on the men's side at the actual Olympics, you were the only British coach involved with the coaching staff. I'm pretty sure, right?
Yep.
So
Tony was with us initially.
Yeah.
And then once we got 18 months out, something like that, Tony was no longer part of that program. He had done some scouting. So Tony and I were the only two that were sort of involved, and then I was stay. I
mean, we'll talk about the beginning of the program in a minute, but I guess just on that note, like when you talk about opportunities for British coaches and the London 2012 Olympics, we're obviously at home, Great Britain team, and on the bench there aren't more British coaches. Do you feel like that is a failure on the administration's part or the federation's part of saying of not making sure that there were more British coaches involved to potentially carry that legacy through and pass it on domestically, so that we've got people with Olympic experience that are then able to give back to the country? Because the rest of those guys, obviously, now they're doing great things, but ultimately they're back in America and don't have a connection with the UK game in that way. Mm-hmm. I'd just be interested in kind of hearing your opinions on that.
Yeah, I think when we talk about ultimately, we talk about the BBL as an opportunity, but ultimately coaching national teams at the highest level, and I think we've seen it on the women's side as well, we should aspire to have British coaches coaching those teams. And when we go back and talk about career paths, and that should be part of our pathway. Like we should be looking to have somebody coaching our British Olympic team the next time we qualify. And so I think there was nobody at the point of the Olympics that we could have, I wasn't anywhere near ready to coach a team like that or good enough to coach that. And nobody else in the UK was. And ultimately they went with people that had a UK connection, and I think we had two great coaches in terms of Nick and Chris. That I don't question or challenge, and never have done, because I think at the moment in time we had the best possible people that were the two lead coaches. I think where we probably could have been better is had British coaches on the bench, and we had a number of environments, a number of situations that we had people on the bench that weren't coaching or that really took places of coaches. And I think we, and I've openly talked about it with those people. I mean, I have a great relationship with all those, and I think we missed an opportunity there to put coaches in a position where they were on the front line and living it and then come back. But at the same time, we talked about experiences. Like, nobody's ever come back to me as a British coach and then asked, hey, can you help us with pathways, or can you help us with this? Since 2012, other than when Warwick was there, there's been no communication from British basketball. And I think that's a factor now. I don't know whether that's because there's constant changes, people lose track of who people are, but there has to be experience in Tony coaching overseas, and there has to be experience in myself coaching overseas, Chris Hackett coaching overseas in a different environment, but still a different pathway. How often do those people, how often are they reached out to? So I think ultimately there's a disconnect somewhere. Is it because British basketball doesn't have basketball people running it? Possibly. When you've got people coming from different sports, they don't know the people in the past, the history, the whatever. So ultimately I'd love to see British coaches coaching at that top level, and that should be part of our pathway. And if it's not as the head coach, there should be somebody there as a lead assistant that's then able to take those experiences, because those experiences, the Commonwealth Games, the Olympics, the European Championships, those are some unbelievable experiences that should be shared.
What ultimately made you decide to step away from the Great Britain senior men's program after the Olympics?
I took an opportunity to go and coach in Germany, and the plan was to remain involved. I had a conversation with Joe Prunty to be on Joe's staff, and at the end of my year in Germany, I got an opportunity to go and coach in Japan. And basically, British basketball said, well, you make a choice. You stay involved with the British program or go coach in Japan. And if you coach in Japan, you can't come and be involved with that. So
was that because of schedule clashes?
I don't know. I mean, I think it was partly down to timing, but I'm not turning down the salary I was earning in Japan to go and earn £5,000 for coaching with the national team. And again, it's just that it wasn't a full-time position. We had 4 to 6 weeks. So I met Joe in Warwick and London, and that was going to move forward. And I've always been passionate about being involved with the national teams, but there comes a point where things couldn't. So it just became, it was impossible for me to do it, basically.
Would you like to be involved again in the future?
Yeah, I'd love to be. I mean, I'd love to be involved in. I've always enjoyed being around the national teams, from playing as a youngster to coaching regional stuff to coaching 16s all the way through to 20s. And then obviously an involvement with the men's program. So, it's an opportunity that I would relish being involved again.
I'd be interested to kind of hear your thoughts on Olympic legacy. In the run up to the Olympics, that was the buzzword, and it was thrown around so often and so much, and there was definitely hope, I think, within the basketball community specifically, that this was going to be the match that lights the fire, so to speak, because we have heard for decades about all this potential the sport has, and this is going to be the opportunity where it's going to be in front of millions and millions of eyeballs. What's your take on the Olympic legacy from a basketball standpoint? Like, what would you say are the tangible, things that have been left behind as a result of the Olympics that wouldn't have existed without the Olympics? And do you think that there is the legacy that people, or even you personally, was expecting there to be prior to the Olympics? Do you think that's what's actually ultimately ended up happening?
Short and sweet, no. I don't think we lived up to what was expected. I think funding We should have siphoned funding that would have given us longer term ability to do things. I think when I look at legacy, the only thing I really see is facility, copper box. There was no real legacy from coaching, carryover from coaching. I don't think there was any real legacy throughout basketball in the UK. I think it allowed GB to continue to exist and run programs. But I don't think the sport as a whole probably embraced it. There's been pockets of money that have come, and I don't know how those have been used and what's happened, but I think that would be the general population's view of a legacy. Like, I can't, to be honest with you, I can't even remember how we defined what that legacy looked like. But to me, when I look at it, we have a copper box where we play in London, which is not really a basketball facility. It does everything, but we're not playing. It's not created opportunities for us to play in European competition or at club levels. We've tried and it's not been successful. Has it boosted the BBL? I've watched a couple of games this year online, and I don't know. Is it the same basketball that we were watching 5-10 years ago, with the exception of a couple of teams?
What do you think would have needed to be done differently in the run-up to the Olympics to change the outcome?
Well, I think, to me, the legacy is full-time employment for, that's where you're going to underpin the success of the sport in the country. We can't continue to run it as a volunteer basis. I know we have areas that, we have, Barking has a professional environment, but they're employed through the school or whatever. You have a couple of academies that do that, but it's what we talked about earlier. The BBL has no full-time assistants, let alone 2 full-time assistants and a video guy and all the other things that you need to grow a club. And I think, for me, legacy would have been about providing programs and pathways for coaching for the players, which it may exist. I'm not on the ground there, but I don't see any real evidence of that.
Yeah, no, it's. I think when I look at it, I'm like, I agree with you on. Yeah, definitely the copper box is even though it's not a basketball specific facility, it's provided opportunities that wouldn't have otherwise existed in terms of having a venue in London that's medium sized. That obviously London Lions are playing out of it, so for them it's unbelievable. Otherwise, their options would have been slim. But I think the other thing is that actually the formations of the British basketball program as a whole, like, that came about because of winning the Olympic bid, right? And before that, we didn't. Well, not in the immediate years before, we didn't have senior teams that were trying to compete in European competitions and whatever. And since then, we're qualifying for Eurobaskets and doing stuff. So
I agree. Yeah, and I think our underage groups have benefited from that.
Yeah,
that there's been a more directed program with GB.
Yeah. But yeah, I still think, as you say, that there's a lot more that could be done, and definitely from I remember so clearly. Do you remember the London test event, the sort of the invitational tournament that was done? The sort of, I think it was like the November before in 2011.
Yeah, we had Lithuania there and
China.
That's it.
Yeah, and it was like, I remember going there and just being blown away by the amount of media that was there. And I was just, because I'd been used to going to basketball events, and I was pretty much the only one there, with maybe Mark Woods and Rob Dugdale, and all of a sudden, everyone's fighting to try and have a conversation with people, and there's TV cameras everywhere. And I was just like, if the Olympics is going to be, this is just a test event, the Olympics is going to be this times 100 or whatever. Basketball has the potential to be in front of millions of eyeballs, for over the course of 2 weeks on a regular basis. This could really change a lot. But at the same time, I do remember thinking in the run-up to it, well, to capitalise on that potential interest that's going to come off the back of the added exposure and media visibility, there needs to be an infrastructure in place to be able to support that potential interest, and that would have needed to be done in the run-up to the Olympics, the years before preceding it. Like if all of a sudden after 2012 hundreds of thousands of kids suddenly decided they want to play basketball, well, actually, if they'd flooded the clubs that has existed, the clubs would have been overrun and wouldn't have actually had the capacity, the number of coaches to be able to support those kids. And it's something that, it's almost like when the bid was won, that was when the stuff needed to start being put in place and said, okay, best case scenario, let's say that 2012 leads to this much interest in basketball. This is what needs to be done now to ensure that we can then capitalize on it. And that, I don't think that work was ever really done. And then obviously there was that spike in interest never really happened in the same way. So,
and I think that probably fell between, it was almost like in no man's land, because you had England basketball, then you had British basketball. British basketball was focused on all this stuff. British basketball was focused on this stuff, and it never really kind of, there was no cross-pollination. And things like that visions of that just got lost.
Yeah. And of course there was always, and to this day, there's the sort of the politics between the home nations and the British Basketball Federation, and I think because there wasn't that, as you call it, cross-pollination or a sort of coordinated approach of saying, okay, we're Basketball England, Basketball Wales, Basketball Scotland, and we're taking care of the grassroots, but how can we tie in with you as the British Basketball Federation to ensure that this sort of elite end is connected to the grassroots? And I don't think that work was ever done, and those conversations were never had in a way to ensure that the Olympics was the success that we would have all wanted it to be from a basketball standpoint anyway. And obviously that's incredibly frustrating.
Don't you think that sort of mirrors what goes on in the UK in general? If you just take London, for example, and all the clubs and the talent. I mean, I remember sitting down with Lawal at one point and talking about let's look at like one team in London with hubs where we're feeding the best players, and the best players, like we talked about, that Serbian sort of. But London has always been so disjointed about this is my area, I'm doing this is my team, and so we miss. And I say I think players miss out on so much because we're not connected. No, this is my area, I'm doing it. Yeah. And it's exactly the same model, and that's, I think, goes back to the beginning of our conversation, is why British basketball, in general, not just the national teams, always struggles, because we always seem to be at loggerheads.
Yeah,
and instead of coming together.
Yeah, I think that almost that's where I feel like the federation needs to take more central control in those situations of defining the pathway and saying, okay, whether it's a tiered club system and saying this club is responsible for, you're a grassroots development club, you're an elite club, and actually, when a player gets to this level, you send them to this club, and that's what you need to do, and we're going to reward you for doing that. I always remember Lloyd Gardner always says to me, in football, if a local, grassroots club their kids get signed to Arsenal or Manchester United, everyone celebrates it, and everyone says, oh my God, what? It's seen as an absolute win, not only for the player, but for the club as well, because it's showing that they're developing talent, where within basketball, if a sort of smaller grassroots club, the player receives interest from an elite academy or a professional club or whatever, there's a very different attitude towards it. It's not celebrated in that same way.
I think we had that when you look back at like Sunderland and Leicester and Bracknell, and you had 12 major clubs in the country, and even at junior level, like. I remember traveling with Humph Lawn, playing at East London, playing at Lofts, travel with Chris Morgan, Crystal Palace, and we'd have to go to Manchester to play a game. We would play 10 teams, 12 teams in a league, a national league, and then we went away from it. And suddenly it's like, we're going to have as many teams as possible. We've diluted our pool of players. The players are not playing against the best players week in, week out. It comes down to money, but that, I think, hurt us when we went away from that true national league of top teams. And I came from Folkestone. If I wanted to play top basketball, I had to go to Crystal Palace when I was a youngster. And that doesn't happen anymore. Okay, so now you go and play at Canterbury, and then you play at somewhere else. And so now we've got all these kids, and it's not a true national league. So our best players are not playing with each other week in, week out, which is what you see you go to Spain, these better kids are funneled to Barcelona, Madrid, Valencia.
Yeah.
So
and that's what's almost happening with the academy. What happened with the academy leagues, where it's like, at one point when the EABL was slightly smaller, the elite academies were where the top kids were going, and it almost made the junior national league redundant because actually the way you could see the best players every single week without fail go against each other was in the academy leagues, not in the national leagues, where now it's become even more convoluted, and it's difficult from a governing body standpoint. If you're Basketball England, your funding is based on the participation numbers and your number of clubs, and being able to point to all of those numbers and say to Sporting, and look how well we're doing, look at the growth of this, where you're trying to do both the grassroots side of things and ensure that you're developing elite talent for the future. And so, I understand that there are definitely challenges within that from a federation standpoint.
But I think you can, even with that Sport England funding, you can have and continue to grow the sport at grassroots level, at that base level, and even the second tier and third tier. But we need to have a clearly identified elite level. And from what you're saying, even the academies are now getting diluted. Junior National League, you had Michael Hales, Steve Bucknell, Joe White. Those guys all playing all on the same teams back in the day. And so you would be able to see the best talent. You could go to a game and watch 10 kids that were top 10 players in the country on one day.
Yeah.
And they're competing against each other.
When you look at, out of interest, because obviously you came up in a generation, of course, where there was a wealth of talent, but then also you've been involved with coaching the junior national teams and seen a bunch of talent come through, and then of course now I assume that you can maybe keep tabs a little bit online and see sort of some of the players that are coming through, especially at Summer European Championships when games are streamed and stuff. What do you think about the development of junior British talent over the years? Do you feel like it has got better? Do you feel like it's stayed the same? Do you feel like it's got worse? What would be your assessment over the last few decades of seeing it all at every level?
I think I think there's been a better job done in terms of finding those kids, or more kids have, let's say, I think players are gravitated towards basketball that are great athletes, and then we've given them some tool sets, and then they've probably gone to college, refined those, and then come back, or they've gone overseas. How many players have stayed in the UK have actually progressed to playing at the same levels the kids have gone to the States or to Europe? And I think that would, and I don't know that number. I don't know what that looks like. There's been a couple of people now. Maitland is starting to do player development work, which we've always lacked. I mean, in the UK, it's always been about team basketball, throw it out, team stuff, run this, run that, do this. But there's never been a focus on player development. Barking's probably been doing it. And, now some of the bigger academies are probably doing it, but it's never been a major part of British basketball. We've relied on athletes and athletic ability, and I think we can do a lot more, but it goes back to full circle. Who's going to pay you? Is it a full-time job? Are you doing it after school? Are you a teacher? Are you working at a bank and having to do it at your own time? So those things inhibit, I think, at times, that development. I think watching some of the national team stuff in the summer, there are definitely some very talented players coming through. I see a marginal change, but I still see a lot of we're going to get out and press, and we're going to be super athletic, and there is a better understanding. I think there's better teaching going on at certain parts of the country, programs, etc. You can see that within the players. But we're still very reliant on, athletic teams to go out and compete and play. And we've had success at times, and at other times it just doesn't work against, teams in Europe that are being developed. They've got skill sets. They understand how to play the game. So.
Talking about kind of assessing talent, obviously, and analysing basketball games, like your role at the moment, you're an advanced scout with the Toronto Raptors. That's correct, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's been on hold for a year now, really. I mean, I've done a couple of games, but COVID's just killed any advanced scouting stuff. So I've ended up coaching some this year. I decided to take a year from last March to enjoy doing some of the things I haven't had an opportunity to do. So I've ended up coaching some high school basketball, a lot of fly fishing and skiing.
Wow.
And I'm in that process now of some stuff in Asia, some stuff possibly here, going back to being full-time. And the break's been great. It's allowed you to step back and watch things. So I had an opportunity to go up and spend time with Chris and, with him and do stuff, but was down in Florida the last 2 weeks, 3 weeks ago, caught up with Nick and those guys. But, basketball world has been turned upside down a little. It's, changed all that periphery stuff. So
very much so. Like, do you feel like, having done multiple stints, both in the G League and also obviously around NBA teams, do you feel like you're close to being able to kind of have an opportunity to really sort of infiltrate that NBA ecosystem and follow in the footsteps of the Nick Nurses, the Chris Finch, and potentially have an opportunity within the big league, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to think so. I think professional sport is a very political animal in terms of component structure of teams and networks that you're in. I think for me, sort of tactical and technical, I feel as though I would be more than capable of being in those environments. Does that environment present itself? Who knows? I don't know. I mean, we're examining some of that now, but it's a difficult world. Is it would I prefer and go and coach overseas as a head coach, where I can run my own team, or would I rather go and be back at the bottom of a totem pole, which is what would happen? I mean, my experiences don't put me on the front of a bench, or maybe not even behind a bench. Maybe it's in the video room. So I think it depends on the environment. I think there's opportunities. When I left for Thailand from Toronto, in hindsight, maybe the option to stay in Toronto was a better decision at the time. But I chose that route. I went to Thailand. I had great experiences since and opportunities post that. So we'll see what happens. I'm not hung up on it. You'd love to be able to be part of that, but you have to be competent in the eyes of the people that are going to hire. They're not just going to hire you because you're the friend of Nick or the friend of Chris or the friend of Nate or whoever.
Yeah. No, it's funny talking about starting from you'd have to kind of work your way up again. It's like even I think about Fab Flournoy and him being here, and when he was here was really at the top of the top, and then he gets to the NBA and all of a sudden it's like to even try and find a photo of him involved with the team is very difficult. To see him on the bench is very difficult. It's like he's again like working his way up and having to kind of I mean, Fab is in the video room, and does some player development. So it's a very big change from running his own team and being a head coach. Those are the choices you make. Yeah, 100%. Talking about that Thailand opportunity when you left the Raptors, like I heard you say talking about that was like the first time where you had an opportunity for a job with actual financial stability and security, almost like what you'd been working up towards. When you're talking about opportunity over money, all of the periods up until that point had been opportunity, and now all of a sudden you're like, okay, now you can, I don't want to say cash in, because obviously it was an opportunity as well, but actually there was a financial upside to it as well.
Absolutely.
When you think about that, sort of taking that job and that moment, did it feel like sort of, I guess, vindication for the sacrifices that you'd made up until that point?
Yeah, that's, what was that, 8 years? I don't know, 7 years in. And, Chris and I always talk about it. It's a 10-year cycle until you get your feet embedded and you start to make. So, yeah, absolutely. I mean, Japan afforded me that opportunity, and then the opportunity to go back or to go and be involved with the G League, which is obviously a drastic change in finances then. But it was the opportunity again over the money. But then Thailand, Philippines, and Qatar all presented a lot better financial situations. And you've done your work, you've grafted, you've made those changes, and they were all steps in the right direction as well. But ultimately, you want to make money. Like we talk about in England, like the problem there is that you don't make the money. So ultimately, you're trying to take those opportunities over money early to put yourself in a position to now have an opportunity, but also to make money at the same time. And you've got to. It's not going to happen overnight. You're going to have to graft and work and be prepared to fail, to be hired again, and fail again and hire again. So
ultimately, that job in Thailand led to a job as the head coach of the Thailand National Team as well, right?
Yeah. So I went out. Well, I actually went out to do both: work with a club, and then as a national team coach just for that summer. The plan was to go back to Toronto, and we ended up losing to the Philippines in the final of the Stankovic Cup. I think it was by 6 or 7. We were right there. They'd never gotten that close. And it was really fun in a short space of time, a lot of improvement. And then the national organization, which is also the club team that ran the club team, basically put an offer on the table and said, we want you to stay and coach the club and the team. Then other teams objected. So I ended up just coaching the national team. And sort of oversaw what went on at the club with Mono Vampires.
Okay, and then I saw an article someone had written where they'd interviewed you talking about how they had actually ended up firing you completely unexpectedly. You thought that it was sort of a long-term project, which both you and the federation seemed to initially have been in agreement about, that it was going to be 3 to 5 years or whatever to get to kind of where you wanted to be, and then out of nowhere, you lost your job. Like, how difficult was that of a pill to swallow? And ultimately, have you had any more clarity since then about kind of like the reasons behind it and why they ultimately ended up going in that direction?
Sure, I can. We just won a silver medal in one of the I can't remember which it was, Southeast Asia or something. And I'd come back. I was in Denver with Finchy, and we pulled into the airport in Denver to go back to Thailand. And my phone rang, and it was my assistant, a guy called Doug Marty, who I've known for years, coached in Luxembourg, was coaching the club team, and he said, "I think when you get back, they may fire you." I was like, "Huh?" And I'm sitting in the car with Finchy, and Finchy's like, "What's that about?" I'm like, "I don't really know." Like, anyway, I land, they meet me, and they're like, "We've decided that we need to go in a different direction. Okay, you got to pay me out and do whatever." So there was all those sort of discussions. Anyway, what transpires is the federation had changed certain personnel, and the people that had now come into the federation wanted the club coach that was the coach of the team that they were affiliated to, which is what. So they basically swapped it out. And of course, they're like anywhere, especially in Asia, there's arguments about money owed and done whatever. And, one of just some of the things you have to deal with and pass with. But it was all to do with a change of guard and who was there and what they wanted. And they wanted control. And of course, they saw me as linked to the other club that had previously been overseeing the national team. So it was just one of those things.
Do you think that every time you kind of reach a tier, like sort of, I don't know the best way of describing it, but almost like being able to check that box of like, okay, senior national team head coach, it puts you in a new sort of category that opens you up to a new set of jobs that maybe weren't there before. So ultimately, you ended up then coaching the Qatar national team, right? Like, do you think that opportunity came off the back of having coached the Thai national team? And do you think in the future now, if other, when there are other potential senior national team job opportunities that are going, you're going to be in the mix because you now have that on your resume?
Sure. The Qatar job came directly from being involved with the national team of Thailand. We played Qatar in the Asian Championships in Iran. We had no imports. We played with just straight Thais. And Qatar had a lot of naturalized plus an American, and we lose to them on the buzzer. In fact, we had the ball to win, and the point guard dribbled it off his foot. So from that, there was obviously people took note of. There was a lot of Thailand had never really featured in the Asian stuff, and they hadn't played in the Asian Cup for a long time. And a lot of people took notice of the way that we played and how we played and the way we did things. FIBA officials, and there was a guy that was working with Qatar at the time, Fess Irvin, who was uber complimentary about what we'd done and how we played. And when they fired the Greek coaches after that tournament, they directly approached. I didn't use an agent. I didn't have an agent at the time, but they basically came to me, and the process sort of rolled on, and it went from there. And then that puts you in a position because we played New Zealand in 2 games before they went to play Iran in their Olympic qualifying rounds, and we lost the first game, beat them in the second game. Piro was there. Piro Cameron was there. So you're playing at a different level. You're competing against these other coaches, and it's like a brotherhood almost. That they see you, they see how you do things, whether you win or lose. They know what the situation is. You're competitive. The way the team plays. So it ultimately puts you in those conversations when teams came up. And there was a number of situations when COVID hit last year that were available. That I've chosen not to travel and live overseas while that stuff's going on. And I decided to start my green card process, which I've been meaning to do for years. So I'm now a green card holder, which allows me to obviously live and work here without any issues.
Wow. Do you have an agent now? Just out of interest, show my naivety here. Do most coaches have agents? Does it work the same way with agents with players as agents with coaches?
Yeah. I have one now, and that will work both FIBA and NBA. Early on, I don't think you need one. You need to just find opportunities and grow. And agents aren't going to help you go and coach at regional league or in Germany. That's all about networks. And I think where coaching on the national teams level helps, because you're exposed to people in the German organization that are involved in other clubs. And the word gets, hey, well, this guy was coaching in the summer and would be a great fit for you. But the more you move forward, then like Japan, I used an agent. The Philippines, I used an agent. And then Qatar just happened. I didn't need to. I could circumnavigate that. But with the stuff that's now developing in Asia and in the US, then I'll use an agent for sure.
I'm aware of time here, so I'm going to start with firing some quick, rapid questions at you
Sure.
to finish up with around various different topics, looking back on your career. And I'd like to start with your favourite basketball memory.
I mean, London 2012, being part of that is something that you never thought would happen or be involved with, and is irreplaceable, really.
Is there a particular standout memory from London 2012 that is your sort of highlight of the entire tournament?
I think I would say it's across the program that we had. We played that test event in Manchester where we played the United States team, and sitting on the bench, and suddenly it's a reality, like Kobe and LeBron and these guys are all standing there, and it was like you're there to be an assistant on the bench, and you're watching a game like a spectator. It was just unreal. So things like that.
I think, looking back, as much as I felt like at the time I was aware how big of a deal it was, it's only really when you look back at the opportunities that came with the 2012 Olympics
Absolutely.
that you just realise that, since then there has been nothing like it, and obviously in the run up to it there was nothing like it. It's just a completely unique experience that I don't think anyone in this country will experience again until we're potentially able to host an Olympics.
Absolutely.
It's going to be a tough one, but the best British junior player that you've ever seen, it doesn't matter what they did at senior level, but as a junior, who would get the nod from you?
Andrew Sullivan would probably be at the top of that list. Pretty special as a junior, commanded the game. And then Lowell, it was funny, I'd pick Lowell up in Croydon and take him to camps and this long gangly thing, and to see him grow, the way that he did is phenomenal. So, those two guys have, I think, been benchmarks for British basketball as juniors. Saying that, as a young kid, I got to see Buck and those guys are older than me playing. So there's been a few, but those guys stand out.
Do you think it was at the time, do you think Lowell, it was obvious that Lowell was a future NBA player, NBA All-Star, even at that age? Or when you're talking about the likes of a Buck, a Sullivan, a Lowell, do you think at a junior level they were all very similar kind of talent level, and they all could have potentially gone on, if the opportunities had been there, to be real NBA stars?
I think it's very hard to say at that age that they were going to be all-stars and they were going to be this. I think they definitely, Lowell had a skill set and that was different to the rest of them. And you could see that there was the potential to play in the NBA. But there's so many players out there of the same standard, and it takes just one thing to define a player over another. So I think Lowell probably, yes. And I didn't know Buck well enough at the time. And Andrew probably was just always going to be a very good professional outside of that environment, like working Europe and high levels.
The best individual performance you've ever witnessed by a British player?
Wow.
At any level.
And yeah, it's probably going to go back to Lou, men's teams, or when we played at junior levels. He's just so commanding in the game. Will Neighbor, when I was coaching the under-20s and the under-18 with Jimmy Guyman, Will Neighbor was pretty dominant at a European level. Had some great performances for us. But probably Lou.
And then, best, I don't want to say individually best, but or rather name a few, of the top sort of other British coaches that you feel are the best sort of X and O's guys, or people that you'd give you the toughest challenge if you were to play against them? Like, who would you give as a nod if you were trying to label some of the other top British coaches?
You know, Tony's right there. Do we obviously count Rob as British now? Probably not. That there's a generation of coaches there that I don't know that well. You know, having watched Mark over the Eurobasket stuff that
Mark
he's been
Stutel.
doing. Yeah, he does a great job. Jimmy Guyman, you know, I see as long term as one of the most underrated coaches I think that's ever been around. His understanding of the game was second to none. I mean, I learned so much from Jimmy the time that I spent with him.
Did he assist you with the under-20s as well? I feel like I went to an
he was
under-20s
my
camp
assistant.
when he was there.
Yeah, he was my assistant, and learned an awful lot from Jimmy. You know, he's just wealth of knowledge. And I remember playing him with East London teams that were, you know, super athletic and probably not as skilled, but just overpowered a lot of teams. And we'd play Jimmy and his teams, and it was just a whitewash. You know, they just manhandled just athletes in the way that he coached and what he did. So I don't know other British coaches.
I think that's good. You're giving us
You know, Lloyd's. I'm glad to see Lloyd's back coaching. You know, he's always been, you know, at the forefront of what's going on with British basketball.
Yeah, Lloyd Gardner.
It's good to see him back at Manchester.
100%. And then finally, just sort of, I guess, looking forward, the future. You know, you said that you're potentially looking at opportunities at the moment. Like, what's in the immediate future for you, do you think, if you were to place a bet on kind of where you're most likely to end up? And then looking a bit more ahead, sort of the next 3 to 5 years, in an ideal situation, if everything works out as you would hope it to be, where would you like to be?
I mean, ultimately, I'd love to be in an NBA environment, being able to have an impact and, you know, at whatever level. Ultimately coaching, but I think, you know, weigh that between that and going back to Asia, a couple of the opportunities, you know, in Japan and possibly in China, where you can be a head coach of a program and run things. But I think everybody's dream would be to be involved in an NBA staff, but who knows what that's going to look like even now moving forward next year.
Perfect. That's a perfect place to leave it. Tim, thank you so much. This was a little bit different than my normal style of sort of doing a career rundown, because obviously you've done that before, but it proved to be really interesting. I think we went in depth on a lot of topics that people find super interesting, and I really appreciate you taking the time, and I wish you all the best with your next opportunity, whatever that might be. Keep us in the loop, and hopefully I will see you very soon.
Very good. Thanks, Sam. Appreciate it.